3, 2, 1. Neil Eastwood, welcome back to the Care Home Show.
Hi, yeah, pleased to be back, Simon. Thank you.
Well, it's great to have you back. How many times have you been on the podcast now? It's got to be 3, maybe?
Possibly three, I think, probably.
As my first ever guest alongside Mr. Mike Corbett, of course. It's to have you back on the show.
Yeah, no, I'm pleased to be back. Although, weirdly not face to face, in comfy chairs.
Yeah, it's bizarre not being in the studio. Even still now, I've done quite a few of these podcasts over Zoom, and don't get me wrong, it's nice and convenient, and I enjoy it, and it's great to be able to continue doing it. But yeah, I kind of would like to be able to do it in the studio at some point. But yeah, when the time is right, we'll get there eventually, I'm sure.
Yeah. Hopefully in the autumn.
So, for anyone that doesn't know you, please can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about kind of what you're up to in your world?
Yeah, sure. So I am, I guess, a social care recruitment geek. It must be by now. So I've spent many years since I was a care provider myself in dom care, trying to figure out how we find high quality people, how we build our workforce and how we keep them. And that's kept me busy for the last 10 years. And I've written a book about it. You could write more than one book on this topic. I'm always learning. And I traveled around the world talking to care providers and trying to find tips and tricks that we can bring back to this country, for example, and to the benefit of the sector, really. And along the way, we have a business, Sticky People, which apart from sort of consulting and supporting people around recruitment, does psychometric screening, so identifying people who, their traits and behaviours before you hire them. And then more recently, what has been my kind of obsession is Care Friends and the whole employee referral thing, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Absolutely. Not to mention, of course, the book.
Yes. So the book's still, I checked the other day. So some of you may know this if you've written one, on Amazon, you get like an author login and you can see how the sales are doing, and they're still selling. It's still selling really well after 3 years. So yeah, I'm really pleased that it seems to be helping people. And I do bump into people, now virtually, but previously in real life. And there's a lot of support the book's given, which is great because it's been ideas I've hoovered up from others, and it's really about sharing good practice. And it's really good to hear that it's helped people with what is one of the biggest challenges that we face.
Of course. And just for anyone that likes the sound of the book that hasn't heard of it before, it's called Saving Social Care.
Thank you. Yes, Saving Social Care, available on Amazon. And I do give all the royalties to the Care Workers charity, so I don't make a penny out of it. So if that makes people persuade them to buy it, then please do.
Bless them. The CWC, the Care Workers charity, of course, is a fantastic charity. For anyone that's not aware of it, it provides hardship grants to past and current care workers who have fallen on hard times. So a very important charity. And well, thank you, sir. Bless you for obviously giving the royalties to the CWC. It's a great thing to do.
No, it's a great cause, and I know it's supported by a lot of providers. So yes, it's really it's a great thing.
Indeed, it is. So before we get stuck into your perspective around our main conversation, which is, of course, how is COVID impacting the social care world? Tell me a little bit about what's your kind of view on our current set of circumstances, if you will, at a high level.
Yeah, so it's fascinating with the situation we've got ourselves into, and everyone watching this will know that we've been, social care as a sector has really been hit the hardest. And from a recruitment perspective, I would say all the chips are now in the air. So the challenges we had before coming into COVID are all kind of almost reversing themselves. We still have challenges and they feel equally bad. So where we are right now, we did a national poll, which Skills for Care kindly crunched the numbers on with CMM magazine, and that was at the end of March. And we were looking there at providers saying they had about 20 to 25% of their staff off for a variety of reasons: self-isolation, shielding, and childcare challenges, and so on. And that has improved. So I think the shock of losing temporarily losing staff has kind of recovered. But there are other there are other challenges going on. And if you look at the public's perception and really where we are with recruitment is we need large swathes of potential job seekers to, first of all, know about social care and have a positive view of it. Actually, we haven't done too badly. And I think we've got questions coming up that we can pick into this a little bit more. But we've never had a profile like we've had. And I think, if we talk to people like Vic Rayner and Martin Green, they've probably never had that level of interest in us in the sector. And that's been broadly a really, really good thing. There are challenges, of course, with the PPE, with infection control, with the perception of the public of probably, unnecessary concerns in many cases because operators have done wonders to make it safe places, but for clients and residents. But it does, so there's massive awareness, but then how people interpret that as, would this be a place I'd like to work? We're getting variable results from that. And whether in the future we head into a recession, and recessions really beat everything in terms of vectors for influencing recruitment. And if we do go into a deep recession, then broadly that is good news for us because it does increase choice. But with it comes other challenges, and we'll probably talk about those in a bit as well.
Definitely. So a lot to think about. I think that's fair to say. So I mean, it's great that we're getting to have this conversation. I know that leaders within care businesses will have been giving an awful lot of thought to what is the future of the care workforce, how's this all going to play out relevant to COVID. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to explore those subjects and get some clarity around things. Before we get into the nitty gritty side of things, I'd be really interested to find out how Care Friends is going. So it'd probably be good to just frame exactly what Care Friends is and just explain a little bit about the journey that you've been on since our last podcast, or maybe the podcast before. I can't remember anyway, but yeah, bring us up to speed.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that, and no one necessarily knows about it because we haven't launched yet, that happens on Tuesday, the 16th of June, so very soon. The Care Friends is focused entirely on maximising what we have identified as the very best quality source of staff, and that is employee referral. And what it's attempting to do is, by using what's called gamification, so incentives, small incentives, and behavioural psychology, and by using the platform of an app on a care worker's phone, to overcome many of the problems and the friction that we had in employee referral schemes, and largely it seems to be achieving its goal. I'm delighted to say. So the idea is that the app takes and we think about 70% of providers are familiar with and run an employee referral scheme at the moment, and the challenge has always been it's often moribund, forgotten, orphaned. It's a torn poster on the wall. Care staff forget when they're in front of their friends to recommend people, and so what Care Friends does is it makes it more engaging, and it brings it front and center. So we would take, let's say, £100 referral budget, and we would do two important things to it. One is we would convert it to points, and the second thing we would do is spread it across the different milestones through reaching out to your friend, them coming in for an interview, them being hired, and them staying a period of time, and spread those points instead of backloading them like most employers typically have done. And it's instant, so that as soon as you do something, you get points for it, and you're kept informed as a care worker, as a care assistant, all the time on what's happening with the progress of your applicants. So it's simple thing. It's really simple. Underlying, it's a really simple concept. But by removing those roadblocks, what we've opened is a flow. It's not a flood. It's a flow where previously there was a trickle of great quality candidates, and they stay longer. We've been around long enough now to measure that they stay longer. So it's been really gratifying. So where we are right now, as I mentioned, we're just about to launch. We've got about 2,600 care staff out there at the moment actively using the app, and with the waiting list we have, and with people all queuing up to sign up, I would say that's going to rapidly grow, that number. And then of course we're getting increasingly people who are hired joining their friends at work, enjoying the job because they've been selected for their values, and staying as long-term members of staff. So that's been always the goal of Care Friends, and I'm really delighted that finally we can launch it and get many more care providers involved.
I mean, I remember you telling me about this. I mean, it might have even been before Care Friends went kind of live. It might have been a kind of a conversation that we'd had in the really, really early stages. But I remember thinking to myself, that sounds like a bloody good idea. I look forward to seeing how this unfolds. So to have watched it unfold and to it now be at a point where it's going to launch next week, firstly, I'm delighted for you, but I'm delighted for the sector as well, because I hear it's going really, really well. So it would be good to kind of explore that in a little bit more detail. So tell me a little bit about some of the trials and things that you've been running so far, because the success that you've had sounds great, but give us a bit of an insight into the beta trials that you've run so far.
Yeah, so we did like an alpha trial, a very early trial with a prototype, just in one home care provider. And then we widened it. We got EU funding last year, and then that was focused on Cornwall. So we did some Cornish trials with providers down there, and we learned an awful lot from that. And then we moved into a phase where people would pay us. They did pay for a license fee. We actually discovered as part of the pilots that giving someone something for free meant that they didn't necessarily invest as much in the launch as you did when you've paid something for it. So although I always wanted this to be a low-cost thing that is not going to be gouging money from the sector, if it creates a bundle of value, I want most of that value to be with the provider and not us. I'd far rather someone was delighted and we were helping recruit than we were making more money. So that we've then taken on these prepay providers, including at just before Christmas, Majestic Air, as you mentioned, and a couple of others, and we've just built that up, and we're learning all the time, and so we're constantly refining and tweaking it. And so if you think of the different stakeholders we have, the app has to work for care workers, care assistants. They have to understand it, love it, find it easy to download, be engaged with it. Has to work for the employer too. It's going to be simple to operate the system. And then we've got the applicant, of course, and we're reaching out to them often for the first time. They're not on Indeed, let's say. They're not an active job seeker. Someone's picked them and said, you should, Simon, be working in care. Come and join me. So your starting point is, what are you talking about? So we have to, find a very slick way of getting them to inquire. So there's been many moving parts with it, but we've got now to the stage where, as I say, we've got about 2,500, a little bit over 2,500 care staff, and there's been about 16 or 1,700 what we would call expressions of interest so far. So these are people out there inquiring, and most of them do get hired. So there's 1,600 or so of them, and there have been 34,000 job shares. So if you're on your app, you can pick a job that's available in your company, and you can share it with your friend via text message. The popular way is a text message, WhatsApp, or more widely on Facebook. They're the top three. So I might put that the job ad on Facebook, and it might reach 100 of my friends. And the message is really cool from an employer's point of view, because it's saying, come and work with me. It's a great company, which is much more convincing than if the employer says it. But most of them are directly picking friends they thought about for a while should be doing the job. And then we've got so far about 355 hires. It's always lagging the hires because of DBS, because of references and so on. So that number is catching up all the time. But it's been, it's been really good. And now we're finally, putting the word out. So looking forward to it.
I think that the premise for the platform is, although it's simple, obviously there's some level of complexity there, but the fact that it's had such fantastic user adoption, even in the relatively small trials that you've done, and the success that it's had, I mean, it's a testament obviously to the fact that you've done a great job in putting it together, but it really shows there is a demand for this. And of course, as and when the platform's launched in its entirety on Tuesday, hopefully that will mean that from a new client adoption perspective from your side of things, that there's just going to be a shed load of other people that you could start helping and to get people through that referrals process.
I think so. And I think in the current, coming back to the topic of today, then you know, it's very hard if you're not allowed to see your friend physically to say, come and work for me. So it was already a broken process, and that bit, we overcome that bit because you don't have to physically be with them. And if there are more of your friends that are out of work, then there's a bigger pool for you to pick from. You would be the right one with the right values so your workforce can act as a triage, can act as a screening tool for you to pick the people who would absolutely make the best new members of staff. You know, the ones that are able to reach your care home or home care operation, that are happy to work weekends or on social hours and have the right attitudes.
Definitely. Well, look, I look forward to reconvening again in kind of another 3 or 6 months' time, and getting to see where you've got with it. But I mean, broadly, it's great to hear that it's making really, really good progress. So well done with that. So Neil, as you're one of the leading authorities, if not the leading authority on recruitment for the social care sector, what's your high-level overview on kind of how the whole COVID situation is going to impact the social care world?
I think after we're through the worst of this, I think it's the economic impact of it will probably mean that the recruitment's going to get better in the near term. I think probably, I mean, I'm not an economist, but let's assume that and hope that the economy recovers quickly, which means the labour market will probably tighten back up. One thing I'm particularly interested in is that there have been so many more people becoming informal carers because of the conditions that their loved ones have been in.
Sure.
And we know that one of the key markers of high performers is overwhelmingly that they've had some kind of family care experience. So what we could be doing is, and we may only see benefits of this in a year or two or longer's time, is that there will be many more people when we talk about social care, what we're talking about, the job satisfaction and the intrinsic rewards resonate with a bigger group of people, millions more people, because they've been put in that situation themselves. So I think that is I'm always trying to look for positives in what has been an awful period of time. I think for recruitment, that could be one of the biggest long-term impacts.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that was a stat that you launched one of the last times we were together. How many, yes. If somebody's had a personal experience of working in an informal care capacity, if you like, what was their times likelihood more than other people than being a high performer or something to that effect? I can't quite remember what stats we talked about then, but
yeah. Well, let me just share the screen, see if I can chuck this so you can see the. Where are we? Let's have a little look, see how this looks. Shout if you can see this.
Yeah, that's up.
Can you see that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
So what we can see, obviously, is an empty chart at the moment. So let me see if I can fill it up. It's squeaking at me. There we go. So these are the reasons why high performers would be identified by the manager as being someone they'd like to clone, someone they'd like 10 more of.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the reasons, the triggers for them coming into the social care sector in the first place. So it might not have been with that provider, but what was the trigger for why you, an amazing high-performing care worker, came into the sector? And you can see, I mean, hopefully it's clear enough on the screen to see, but the red band, of course, just beats everything. And to your question about that must be 3 times more than what the one below, which is I had a calling for care, which is a kind of, could be related in some ways. So I was really stunned by this, that the huge influence of caring for a loved one has on high quality, high performing care staff.
As you say, it's coming down to what that original profile of how did you describe it again? So if you could replicate your highest performer.
Yeah, clone them. So if you, so the question we asked was, and it's a very easy one for managers to answer, which is, can you think of somebody who you would like 10 more of? Who would you like to clone? If we wheeled in a cloning machine with steam coming out of it, and we could put in one of your members of staff, and then it would create 10, and they would be saying, right, let's get to work. Who is that person? And immediately they all knew, I mean, hopefully more than one, but they could easily pick one. And then we said, right, could you go and ask them, how did they get into this? Because, in fact, I might have another stat. Let's see if I can find yeah, it might be before here. Let me go back. Here we go. Yeah, where do these people come from? And there was research done of asking over 3,000 care staff, what were you doing before you came into the sector?
Okay.
And you can see on the screen, hopefully, the donut. And what that tells us is a really interesting thing, which is unsurprising, I guess, which is people have a whole range of routes into social care, into a frontline role. I mean, you can see in the orange there, hospitality is 10%. I wonder what it will be in the coming weeks and months.
And retail, of course, as well.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, and retail. And so there's only that green section of school and college leavers, and it's chopped off the percentage, but you can see it's 15%, the same as retail, really, just about the same. That only 15% of our workforce kind of are born into it and go through college with that in their mind, or leave school, leave college, leave uni saying, I'm going to be a care worker. Only 15% of our entire workforce have had that route. So everyone else must have been doing something else first.
Yeah.
And I think, and that's partly our challenge, is not only that we're a fragmented sector by necessity, we're in almost every community, but equally, people are coming from every different walk of life. So if you're a marketer or a recruiter, it's a headache to try and understand what's our message. And then, of course, people have different, experiences, different callings, as you saw from the other chart. It might be they have a calling for care. Religion has an impact. Informal, care for a loved one has an impact. Many career change. It's very, very hard for us to try and focus on one thing and pump the numbers.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. Is that the first time? It's certainly the first time I've seen that. So where do care sector new entrants come from? Is that a recent piece of work that you've done, Neil?
Yeah, that's the first time that's been shared, as far as I'm aware. Yes. So I think it's really, really interesting to. I mean, it creates challenges for us all the time, and I think that no wonder we find it difficult to recruit. I mean, not only, and we may come on to low pay being cited very, very regularly as a challenge, but it's many of these people are choosing it for a calling, or for the experiences they've had. So pay doesn't. Yes, we want to increase it, but it doesn't solve all our problems.
Yeah, definitely. How have people had to change their approach from a recruitment perspective since the beginning of COVID? What have you seen so far?
Yeah, really, really good question. I think I suppose your starting point is: are they getting more applicants or not? And if you are, and that's very localized. So I've talked to a number of providers, and several were around or within proximity to Gatwick Airport, and they've been inundated with people from the airport and the airline sector who obviously were living in Crawley and around. Yeah. And so they would experience a huge influx. Whereas and equally we hear from Cornwall, there's a lot of tourism and hospitality sector staff who probably lost their job or on furlough. So there's raised levels of interest there that would be notable. But some other areas haven't seen as much level of interest as possible. In fact, there's another really interesting stat. In fact, I shared on LinkedIn a couple of weeks, no, it was last week, I think, that some really interesting stats from Indeed, and I'm really grateful for them. They reached out and shared with me some research they'd done. I wonder if I can share this on the screen. Let's have a go.
Absolutely, go for it.
To see if we can do some really cool research. So obviously, Indeed is, as far as I'm aware, the biggest single source of applicants of all the job boards. So we think job boards are making up about 70% or so of all applicants in a year ever across adult social care, and Indeed is the gorilla in that market, in that jungle by far. So it's very interesting. They have a lot of data, and this particular stat that they shared. And we can maybe afterwards put the link up if people want to go and look at the full research. But you can see what they're showing here is looking at the number of job postings on Indeed. So this is employers posting jobs. And the red line shows you pretty much what everyone else has done. And no surprise, I guess, employers decided they weren't recruiting. And there's actually been a decline in the number of jobs that social care in the UK have been posting, but not by nearly as much. So I think, and I saw that certainly in the early stages that providers were obviously distracted with trying to, manage the initial risk and put in place mitigating policies and procedures and protect, their residents and their clients, and that took precedence over everything. And I think we've moved out of that phase a bit now. In that a lot of those things are now in place and things seem to be improving. But you can see that they were probably quite busy as well and didn't post as many jobs. But there's still, the demand was there. That recruitment of care staff has not relented nearly as much as everything else. I think that one's. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, quick back step, just back to the previous slide. For the people who are listening just in audio rather than without the video, can you just explain a little bit more about this slide, just so people are really clear on when you were talking about the job dropout, if you like, and how that compares to all jobs versus care jobs?
Yes, of course. So what we're looking at, or what this particular stat that Indeed we're looking at, is the level of the frequency of job opportunities being posted by employers over time. And so they baselined at the beginning of February, and they ran that through to May. And by the end of May, care jobs had dropped, I think, by about 15% over the typical running average of the number of postings. But postings from every other job had dropped, probably, and I'm going to get the stat slightly wrong, but almost by 50%. So we've dropped in the sector in terms of the availability of jobs being posted, but we've held up far better than the rest of the country. So we're still recruiting, one of the few sectors that is still recruiting, at high volumes still.
Useful, really, really good just to break that down. Thank you very much. Sorry, I interrupted you. You were just about to jump onto a new slide.
Yeah, no, and again, for the people that are listening, I'll attempt to annotate it for you. So for those of you that are looking at the screen, what we're looking at here is looking at we're now looking at CV search. So Indeed have a CV database. You'll all be familiar with that. And so that is driven by recruiters coming on and searching for through CVs. And what we can see on the screen, and it does look rather like the FTSE index, and that's been, what that's saying is searches for workers with care assistant experience. So these are recruiters and managers going on to a CV, to Indeed CV database and typing in experience. I want a care assistant, someone's CV that says they've got care assistant experience, probably in my local area. Typically, that runs at about 2% of all the CV searches that Indeed manage. When it came to April, it's massively increased to about 10% of all searches across the whole of Indeed are by social care employers and recruiters typing in care assistant experience into the CV database. So that tells you several things. Well, one main one being that, there's a kind of, as you lose staff and need to replace them, there seems to be people looking for experience. They just want someone to hit the ground running. They don't have time to do the training. I think that's what that's saying. And also how much, to think that 10% of all the CV searches are by employers across the whole of every sector are being taken up by care providers shows you the demand levels that we're at, and also probably, the dampened demand in other sectors.
What's your view on how that's going to play out over the next couple of months?
So I think what's going to happen, and this does depend on what kind of recession. As we come out of furlough, what does that mean? Does furlough mean redundancy, or does it, or do people come back into roles? And I think it's messy. It's difficult to understand how that might play out. But my feeling is we will go into a recession, and therefore the number of applications that providers are seeing as of right now, and we're talking in kind of mid-June time, that will increase. I think the demand will increase. The challenge for providers will be, are these people committed future long stayers with me, or are they looking for any port in the storm? And that puts more pressure on the recruiter and the manager to make, wise hiring choices for people with the right values, I would say. And I mean, the upside, of course, is that people have never thought of care before may actually go into it, like many of us perhaps did, with thinking, well, this won't last long, but I'll give it a go. And they love it, and they find they love it. So I don't want to be disingenuous about the people out there looking for a job and say, oh, they're not the right kinds of people at all. We are definitely going to convert people where they didn't expect it, and perhaps we didn't. But so I think things will improve for recruitment. That would be my feeling because of this recession. And then I think in the future we've got more informal care experience amongst the population. We will benefit from that too. So I really hope that will help us, because the aging population, which particularly drives all this demand, is not going away. And while we've been all busy on COVID, people have still been getting older and needing help and needing care. So, and for those of you that remember those charts put out by Skills for Care and the King's Fund and others, it's a relentless growth in demand. So we better get help, and hopefully the economy and this situation, although it's been awful, it could really put us could give us a little fill-up in terms of a recruitment boost.
Well, I certainly think it's important that we focus on the things that we can be optimistic about, and that's certainly one of them. So, yeah, thank you for that, Neil. That's very helpful. As I've begun to do recently, I've been posting that I'm doing a podcast with fill in the blank, whichever podcast guest that was, and this week that was you. I asked to get people to say kind of what do you think that I should be asking Neil, and very kindly we've got a handful of excellent questions. The first of which was from Angela Boxall at Majestic Care. So she asks, do you think that the recent press about the social care world has turned people off or on relevant to working in the social care sector?
Yes, it's a really interesting question. So overwhelmingly, I think it's a positive. If you think about, firstly, the awareness level, and awareness in a positive way. It's not scandals. We've been closely related as a sector. The workers in this sector have been closely related to NHS workers. The key worker kind of collective term has included care staff. The clap for our carers obviously infers care staff as well as the NHS. And so there's been a huge awareness of social care as something as important as the NHS in terms of caring for the vulnerable in our society. So that's a massive win for us. It would have cost multi-millions over years to get that level of awareness. So that's positive, I would say, Angela, positive one. The image of care staff has largely been positive as well. Again, the examples of clap for our carers and the appreciation for care staff operating often without the levels of support that perhaps our NHS colleagues have had, so PPE, infection control, all those kind of issues. The downside, of course, and I think particularly this is for the care home sector, because that's the kind of main focus perhaps for journalists outside of the sector who are not familiar with all the different components in home care and so on, is that care homes have had this perception or negative perception that they've got hit hard, and that has been a problem. I think it is a problem if say, and we are hearing this, where people perhaps accept a job offer and then they go back to their family and say, I've got this job offer and working for a care home, and the family say, we don't like the idea of that because of our perception is, you're not going to have protective equipment, and it's dangerous. And I think it's such a shame, because the providers have taken extraordinary steps under great challenge and duress to make their homes safe, and largely, the vast majority of cases, they're perfectly safe. So that's a shame. We don't quite know. I haven't been able to measure what that negative impact is, but overwhelmingly, I think certainly when we come out of this, and I'm hopeful, they seem to be galloping ahead with a vaccine and so on. I'm hoping that things will improve rapidly for us, where the problem kind of goes away for certainly a period of time, is that longer term we'll benefit from all of that. So probably there's a bit of negative at the moment, but if you had to take it in the round, I would say the press has been a good thing. Definitely, it's so great to have the social sector world put onto the
a bit of a pedestal for once. It's I don't think that it's certainly not happened at this level ever before, as far as I'm aware. So it's just good to see that people are getting some level of appreciation. One thing that's been an interesting observation for me has been the fact that the media have shown some amazing stories about all these incredible things that care workers do, and the one thing that I would say about it is the fact that the public perception is maybe that people think that maybe this is just what's happening now. It would be great for that to be something that people, the kind of average the members of the public would appreciate, the fact that no, that's just the social care and that wonderful things happen on a day-by-day basis. But hopefully this raised profile will continue to a point where people recognise that that's just part of the course.
I think so, and I think that, you know, I mean, what's also good, we haven't touched on, or you did momentarily there, is that the impact of this on the pride of our existing staff. So you know, recruitment's demand levels are really strongly correlated with how many people are leaving the sector. And I think what we've seen are heartwarming stories of how people have, you know, the workforce has really pulled together to make this happen. And I think, you know, there may have been, and very likely to be, some mental health downside to that. You know, they've been under an awful lot of stress for a long period of time, and I fear we're going to see, you know, we're going to see the effect of that. But overwhelmingly, you know, there's certainly been a lot more appreciation for people that have perhaps been ignored in the job they do, and if they feel more proud because, you know, more vindicated for doing the job they're doing, then that's also, you know, a huge boost to the retention in the sector.
Without a shadow of a doubt. So, okay, thank you for covering that one off. Angela actually asked 2 questions. So her second question was, so what can the sector do to make social care an exciting proposition from an employer perspective? So,
yeah, I mean, it's very interesting to look at what job seekers expect from and want from a career, if you like, but not all of them are looking for a career, and that's been one of our challenges, is to focus too much on career pathways, and when many care staff want to work, you know, stay on the front line. So you have to consider then, the question really is, I guess, is what's our value proposition? And I'm actually talking about this on an Australian podcast, the very same question next week, because they have exactly the same challenges. And it's looking at the sector and saying, now we have this awareness, you know, how can we sell the job more? And I think you then have to say, why are people looking for a job and what are their needs? And they broadly fall into 2 groups. There are those people that are joining in order to go somewhere else. Maybe they want to be a nurse or another career pathway. Or those are people being attracted for the intrinsic rewards of the job itself. It's kind of broadly those 2 groups. And so you have to consider what your offer is to either of those two groups. And it's always been a challenge in a very flat structure to find, and very fragmented and small businesses, broadly speaking, to offer a logical career pathway. And there are improvements to that. For example, you know, there's a pathway to being a nurse now, where there wasn't before. But I think that there's a bigger group of people that would like to join for the intrinsic rewards of the job. And then really it's, how do we sell? How do we make the sector attractive to that group of people? And I think part of that is, where do you go looking for them? And as we saw from the charts before, you know, reaching out to family carer groups, people who've got that kind of experience, they're far more likely to make that step because they actually listen to what we're saying in terms of the intrinsic rewards of the job. So it's not simplistic. I think you have to look at the target audience you have, and take, for example, home care. You know, then generally speaking, the average age in home care is higher than in a care home. It's a different pattern of work. You know, there's more flexibility. It's not the shifts. It's just a different way of working, and that seems to appeal to someone who's perhaps more in their 40s and 50s, you know, more life experience, doesn't need direct supervision and so on. So I think you have to look at the audience you're looking to reach and find the right messages. And if you take the example of people that, and there's the increasing group of people that have had experience of caring for a loved one, then we hear repeatedly that the messages we need to give them and what they are looking for from the job is they want to give back to the community. They want to stay active. They want to feel wanted. and appreciated. And social care delivers all of those. We just don't say it often enough. I think there's too much fixation on the money. Now, the money does need to go up, of course, but often for many providers on this call, it's not within their gift to put the salaries up. So we have to sell on other things, I think, than the money.
So it's a case of getting the messaging right to the right audience. You think that kind of sits at the heart of all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. And my starting point would be, look at your existing staff and look at the high performers and understand as much about them as you can. And there lies the answers to where you should go to find them, what language you should use to find them. And then you need to make sure that your recruitment process is as friction-free as it can be.
Makes a lot of sense. No, I think that's really, really useful. Thank you, Neil. Okay, great. Sean Keep asked a question as well. So he said, how best can care providers identify the issues and concerns affecting staff? And I guess he's talking specifically about COVID, but maybe more broadly as well. So maybe address both ends of that spectrum, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, it's another good question. I think, this is easier for residential care providers or those where there's a setting than it is for home care, because in home care, of course, they're often lone working, they're isolated, you're not in contact with them as much. So there's much more effort for a home care provider to be in touch with and monitor. Let's take, for example, the mental health of your staff than it is in a care home. But they're both very, very busy places, and it's difficult. I think that probably, there's been more direct pressure and stress on those in a residential care setting, although I'm not disputing there's pressure all round. But I think, because of this kind of setting with lots of residents in one place, then I think it may be there's been more stress in the residential care sector. Whichever it is, I think it's about communicating with staff, over communicating really, and making sure there's a two-way communication. So it's not about pushing messages to them, it's about asking them how they're doing. And I think making sure, in many cases, I think care staff will work too much because they just feel such an obligation to their residents. And as we're coming out of the temporary loss of staff stage, then I think it's important for providers to recognise that and try and get people to take some time to decompress.
I think that decompression process will be very, very important. So great stuff. Thank you for covering that one off. Andrew Brindley asked two questions as well. So he said, will we get the same issues as in other recessions where people flock to the sector because they can't find employment? Or I guess on some level we've answered this particular question when we were talking about kind of recessionary cycles and things like that. But I guess if you wanted to kind of underline that particular point around how recessions typically impact the sector from a recruitment perspective.
Yeah, let me share another, for Andrew's benefit. I'm just going to see if I can share one more last stat from the Indeed deck, which I think is particularly pertinent here and answers that question. And I'll annotate it for those people that are on the podcast and can't see it. So what we're seeing on this particular slide is a fascinating stat. This is measuring the number of clicks per job ad on Indeed in social care compared to other occupations. And it's looking from February again through to the end of May. So covering the whole pre-COVID to deep COVID experience. And what it's found is that, if it's baselined everybody at 100, it's picked some sectors, agriculture and forestry, care, of course, driving and stocking and loading, those 4 sectors. And what's been remarkable is that care sector clicks on jobs have gone up after COVID. We would expect that. We're one of the only sectors that's recruiting, and it's had a high profile. So if you're worried about your job or you're out of a job and you need one, people should be aware that the care sector is constantly recruiting. But we only see a 15% increase from pre-COVID in clicks to post-COVID. So that is really far less than you would expect. And in fact, to put it into context, then the other 3 sectors lines are way, way above social care. So, for example, agriculture and forestry, the blue line, for those of you that can see it on the screen, is over 100% more clicks per job ad, and we were only at 15% more. So there's something going on here. So to answer Andrew's question, firstly, I would have expected way more interest than we saw. Why is that? What is holding people back? And it may be preconceptions, misconceptions. It may be the whole PPE thing, coming back to Angela's question. Could this really be a serious dampener? I mean, we haven't got those stats out yet, but something odd is happening here. And I think, to the second part of this question, which is what do we do with all of these people, and are they serious effectively? Then you do need to screen, and that means it's more of a challenge on a recruiter. So often the recruiter's now at home, operating without a support infrastructure, and they have to try and triage from what could be, a much larger inbox than they had before. And many of those people won't have care experience. And actually, I like to see applicants without care experience, because I think you can mold them, rather than churning people inside the sector. But what it will mean is more importance on screening. And then you layer into that, hold on a minute, I can't physically see them for an interview. I mean, we do know providers are using, being creative, like, hiring a village hall, which has got a large room, and then having interviews where there's physically a lot of space, which there probably isn't in most care offices. So, but broadly speaking, we're relying much more on the phone and on WhatsApp or on video calls for interviewing. And that means your ability to pick up non-visual cues are limited, and you are on non-verbal cues as well are limited. And so you're trying to make a decision with not all the information you had before, which means, and Andrew's quite right, I suspect that's what he's hinting at here, is that it becomes much, much harder to make a hiring decision. And that's why we need to look for markers like, family care experience. We need to think of questions that really mean something. And Skills for Care have an awful lot of help on their website around values-based recruiting. So I would encourage people to go there in order to look at their interview questions and decide, I need to perhaps work harder at what I'm asking people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the points that that Andrew was making in his question, as well as around how people can, if the recessionary times basically hit and we get a flock of people who basically do want to join the social care world, what happens when recessionary times end? What can we do as from the perspective of retaining people that kind of sit in that, I guess, more transient type of workforce, in as much as the fact that they could be more happy working in other sectors, or potentially could be equally as happy in other sectors, maybe I should say.
Yes, so I think you're right. We will definitely see, the tide will go out again from people that have been hired and joined, where their motivation wasn't a considered one about social care. It was more, I need to get paid employment, so I'm going to do this. As I've said before, I think we'll get some of those people will surprise themselves and us that they love the job and it's the thing they should have been doing, and that's great. But equally, I think what will happen is that if you may over recruit in this period, and so you might be able to move some people who perhaps want to have their primary work elsewhere. They might be willing to move on to, for example, a flexible or a bank service. So there might be creative ways of bringing more flexibility into the sector by having people that have joined, experienced it, but would like to spend their primary time back in whatever it was they did before. I mean, I think it will. I think staff turnover will get worse. I would expect that. I think vacancies will go down, but retention will probably go down as well.
Makes sense. Okay. How is agency staffing being impacted by given the recent Public Health in England guidance, would you say? Yeah, so I mean, again, the media have a role here, and that agency staff have in some ways been sort of cast as super spreaders, and I mean, there are some obviously very hardworking and very, very diligent agency staff who will be horrified, to hear that they might have been unknowingly doing this. Of course, it is a challenge, and Public Health England, of course, guidance may have changed by the time people watch this or listen to it. But there's very strong guidance.
to try and reduce the amount of peripatetic staff. And that will have an impact on the sort of temporary staffing market. I think there's moves towards trying to create a relationship between, say, one agency worker and a particular home, so that you minimise the amount of movement. But it is a big problem, and I think for those providers that haven't got their agency staffing under control, now is the time to do it, because it's going to be very difficult for agency staff, and it does create risk. So although they do perform a very important function, I think it's going to put more focus on recruiting your own bank staff for people, and over recruiting, and maybe because of the recession that will be feasible for most providers where perhaps they felt it wasn't before and they had to use agency.
Sure, that makes sense. What is the outlook from your perspective? What's the outlook for recruitment for kind of the rest of the year, and then in the long term, if you will?
So I think recruitment is going to improve, or the market will improve. I think the job seeker market's going to get bigger, and with the awareness of social care, as we talked about before, I think that will mean probably not a stunning increase, but certainly a noticeable improvement in the number of applicants. Again, I think care providers need to look at the source of their staff and consider which channels are bringing high quality staff in. And as we talked about before, we know employee referral is one of the top quality source. So whether anyone's interested in Care Friends or not, then looking at your employee referral scheme is a very important thing to do, and looking at how you pay, how much you pay, how it's administered, making sure there's awareness of it, because that is a source I would definitely maximise. So I think the market will be better until the recession starts reducing, and that, it's anyone's guess. But I would think in the autumn we're going to find it better. And then, as I say, as we go into next year, we will probably get a benefit from those people that have had this care experience, informal care experience. I think there will be a percentage of them. It won't be huge, but that will probably help us a few percent. But I fear after that we may well, because of this relentlessly aging population, we'll be back, with the challenges we had pre-COVID, probably by the middle of next year.
Got you. That makes sense. Excuse me if I looked like I was pulling a funny facial expression then. I literally was just about to do the biggest sneeze in the world and managed to stop myself because I didn't want to interrupt you because you were saying very important stuff. So I was holding on very tight to make sure I didn't.
Edit that.
I managed to just about managed to pull that one off. So thank you for obviously explaining what you were talking about. So much appreciated. What, in your view, what do you think the most important things that leaders in the social care need to be doing at the moment, relevant to, during the COVID outbreak?
So specific to recruitment and retention, my world, then my first priority would always be, the retention of the staff I had. And to Sean's question before about, the mental health of the staff, I would really be focused on making sure they felt they were supported, they felt appreciated. And I know a lot of providers, just looking at social media, are doing an awful lot of that, which is really good. So looking at making sure we had all the support we possibly can do in place. And that means the basic PPE. I think a lot of that hopefully sounds like providers are getting on top of now. They feel it's a safe workplace. They feel supported, and they feel they've got communication lines. And if they are overworking or whatever, they feel able to take some time off. So I think that's the baseline. In terms of staff turnover, it's always been high staff turnover in the first 90 days of employment. It's always been the worst time. So for those providers that haven't done already, I think you need to focus on that welcome period. It will be difficult now with training limitations and so on. And if you have to move more to online training, you don't get the same level of engagement, unfortunately, that you would do if it was a classroom, or my preference, on the job training where it can be. So we have to do as much as we can, providers, in that first 90 days. And that would mean peer mentoring, really, really powerful. So having a buddy from the existing staff to pool to look after new starters, and making sure the boss and the senior management team are really visible all the time, so they feel supported and acknowledged. So I think the first thing to do is get your retention, in as good shape as you can, and then it would be. And then in terms of recruitment, I would be, as I mentioned before, really looking at the high quality sources, because we're all under pressure. We haven't got the time, so we need to. I'd rather be concentrating, if I was a provider, on a quality applicants than I would on volume, and that will mean employee referral, word of mouth. Social media as well. I mean, there are great quality candidates on internet job boards too, but I think you need to look at the wording, try and differentiate yourself, and triage, as Andrew's question asked, people, so that you're not bogged down with trying to manage volumes of people that are dropping out of each stage of the process. We have heard of higher dropouts after job offer, as I mentioned. So between job offer and hire, you can lose as many as 40% of those new starters before they even start. And my fear is that might be ticking up because of, the family pressures from a new starter of, oh, I don't like the idea of what if you don't have enough PPE? There are misunderstandings perhaps of family members. So it's important for recruiters and managers to be communicating not with the applicant themselves, but kind of through them to the family, to reassure them about the PPE, reassure them about infection control, reassure them that it's a safe workplace, and overcome some of those misconceptions.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, very useful insights as well. Last but not least, what, from a personal level, what have been your own kind of lessons from the COVID circumstances that you've been conscious of and thinking of, and things as this whole crazy set of circumstances has unfolded?
It's been fascinating from a recruitment perspective. I mean, we've touched on a number of the issues. Just everything has changed, and like no one expected it to. And I think, what has amazed me is that I feel that the sector's come together much more. I think we are much more a cohesive group than I felt we were before, and I hope that's going to mean more collaboration inside the sector. I hope we'll get more respect from outside the sector. So, I mean, although it's been an awful thing, actually we might find that it's reset everything. And I'm very optimistic for the future. I think this has demonstrated so much good about how resilient the sector is, even though we were under financial pressures and shortages of staff, as we were not ready for this in terms of where we would want to be. But the sector certainly demonstrated there's massive levels of commitment and here to what we're doing. And I think not many other sectors have the same level of purpose and mission that we do. And I think I hope that attracts some more of the right kind of people in to feel like we're doing something really worthwhile. So I think I'm optimistic that we will come out of it in better shape.
A very optimistic view, and I wholeheartedly agree with everything that you've just said. So, Neil, a pleasure as always. Thank you very much for coming back as a guest on the Care Home Show.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me.
Very welcome.